It is 20 minutes to midnight on the 3rd of November, 1927, and a 58-year-old colliery surveyor named Emrys Prothero is stepping into the cage at a deep anthracite pit in the upper Rhymney Valley. He carries a carbide lamp, a brass dial compass, a steel tape, and a small black logbook bound in oilcloth. He has been down this shaft 240 times in 31 years of service. When the cage rises again, 4 hours and 11 minutes later, the men at the pit head will not recognize him. His hair, black at descent, will be white. He will not speak for 9 days. In his waistcoat pocket, folded to a square no larger than a playing card, is a linen pit plan, dated 1889. On it, in a hand not the original draftsman's, a section of the deepest workings has been shaded over in pencil and marked with 4 Welsh words, Nid yw hawn idoa. This is not to be opened. Prothero has decided, against every instinct of 31 years, to open it. Constable Hugh Merriman of the Glamorgan Constabulary was summoned to the pit head at 4:22 on the morning of the 4th. His notebook, preserved in the family papers, records the following in pencil. Man found sitting on tram rail. Refuses tea. Hair white. Left boot missing. Logbook clutched to chest. Will not release same. No injury visible. No smell of drink. Repeats one phrase thus. It was not empty. That is all Merriman wrote. That is all Prothero said. For 9 days, the colliery company will record his descent as unauthorized and his condition as nervous collapse. His daughter, in Cardiff, will receive, 3 months later, a certificate committing him to Bridgend County Asylum, and a retired underviewer named Elanto Rees, who had given him the linen plan a fortnight before, will die of the black lung on the 11th of December, having told his priest, and only his priest, what he believed lay past the last beam. This is the story of what Emrys Prothero found in the subdrift below the deepest working of a pit that no longer appears on the ordnance sheets. It is the story of a sober, teetotal, chapel-going man whose only evidence is his word, his hair, and 1 page of a logbook that is not writing but a drawing. He was dismissed as broken. Nobody in authority went back down, and the truth, if it is truth, is still waiting under the mountain. A colliery surveyor in the 1920s was not a labourer with a lamp. He was, by the standard of the Coal Mines Act of 1911, a certificated man, required to hold the Board of Trade's second-class certificate, to submit plans in duplicate to the Mines Inspectorate at Cardiff every 6 months, and to sign his name to every new heading before it was driven a single yard. Prothero had held that certificate since 1898. His plans, still filed in the National Coal Board's later regional archive, are drawn in a hand so small and so regular that a later archivist annotated one of them in the margin. Compare copperplate. Possibly drafted with magnifying glass. He drew, in other words, like a man who did not permit himself error. He worked first at a pit near Treherford, then at 2 collieries in the Cynon, then, from 1919, at the deep anthracite working in the upper Rhymney Valley that concerns us. His personal record, insofar as it can be reconstructed from the paybooks, contains no gap for illness, no reprimand, no dispute. He was a widower after 1912, lived in 3 rented rooms above a chandler's, walked to the pit in all weathers, and by the accounts of two men who worked under him, quoted in a 1951 oral history project held at the Glamorgan Record Office, never raised his voice, never went to the public house, and never signed his name to a figure he had not himself measured twice. He wrote his figures in Indian ink, never in pencil, because, as he told a young apprentice in 1924, pencil forgets. He kept, on the small shelf above his desk, 3 books: the Coal Mines Act, a Welsh Bible, and a battered copy of Lyell's Principles of Geology, 3rd edition. His daughter, interviewed once in 1968 for a Cardiff local paper, said she could not remember her father ever telling a lie, even a small one, even to spare her feelings. The colliery manager who signed his committal papers in 1928, a man named Gethin Llewellyn, wrote in a private letter to the Mines Inspectorate, a copy of which survives in a bound file at the National Archives at Kew, the following: "Whatever Prothero says he saw, I do not know. I know only that in 9 years under my authority he never once brought me a figure I had cause to doubt, and I know that the man who came up that morning was not the man who went down. That is not the letter of an employer covering for a subordinate. That is the letter of a man frightened by what he cannot explain. So, not a drinker, not a dreamer, not a man given to visions, a surveyor, a widower, a Methodist, a man who wrote in ink because pencil forgets. That is the witness whose word this video weighs. The buried archive exists to weigh precisely this kind of testimony. The accounts left by ordinary credentialed people whom the institutions of their day found it easier to file away than to answer. If that work matters to you, subscribe. 1 click. It is the only way this channel can keep asking questions that the Coal Board, the Museum, and the Trust would prefer stayed buried. Now, back to Emery's Prothero and the linen plan in his waistcoat pocket. Because the descent of the 3rd of November did not begin at the pithead. It began 9 months earlier, in a terraced house on the lower street of Treelaw, where a dying underviewer had asked a colliery surveyor to sit down at his kitchen table, and had unfolded, between the sugar bowl and the tea, a piece of linen he had kept hidden for 38 years. Ianto Rhys had been an underviewer at the pit from 1885 until 1919, when the black lung finally caught him. By February of 1927, he was 73 years old, weighed less than 9 stone, and slept sitting up in a chair by the window, because lying flat drowned him. His terraced house on the lower street of Treelaw had a scullery, a parlour, and on the sideboard in the parlour, a wire cage in which no bird sat. The canary had died 2 winters before. Rhys had not replaced it. When Prothero called on the afternoon of the 11th of February, a Friday, cold, sleeting, the cage was still there. It was the first thing Prothero noted in his logbook that evening, in his small ink hand. ID, cage empty. Man not much fuller. The two had known each other since 1902. Rhys had signed off Prothero's first survey as a young man. Prothero had, in later years, drawn the plans of the levels Rhys had driven. There was between them the professional intimacy of men who had both signed their names to the same figures. Rhys called for him because Rhys was dying, and because, as he said at the kitchen table, coughing between every second word, there is a thing on this earth, I know, and I will not take it into the ground with me, Emrys. I have carried it 38 years. It is your turn now. if you will have it. Prothero, who had come expecting a request about a will, said nothing. Rhys unfolded it between the sugar bowl and the tea. It was a section plan of the pit's lowest workings as they had stood in 1889, drawn on linen in the manner of that decade, with the shaft in elevation on the left and the levels running out in plan to the right. Prothero recognized the draughtsman's hand, a man named Bevan, dead these 30 years. But at the eastern extremity of the lowest level, where the coal ran into the barrier against the neighbouring seam, a section had been shaded over in later pencil, in a different hand. The shading covered a short spur of drift running downward at an angle of 1 in 4. In the margin, in that same later hand, 4 words in Welsh. Nid yw hwn I way agor. This is not to be opened, Rhys told him. And here I am, quoting Prothero's logbook entry of that evening, which records the conversation almost verbatim in the ink of a man who wrote everything down because pencil forgets. The following. In the September of 89, when we were driving the East Deep, we broke into a working that was not ours. It was cut in the coal, but it was not a coal working. There was a beam across it, put there to close it. Bevan measured what he could measure, and drew what he could draw, and then the manager came down. And then a man from Cardiff came down, and then the beam was made into 3 beams, and the drift was sealed, and the plan was altered, and every man who had seen it was paid 12 shillings above his week, and told that if he spoke of it, he would not work in the valleys again. I did not speak of it. I am speaking of it now because I am dying, and because you are the only man I know, Emrys, who writes in ink. Prothero asked, the logbook records this too, what lay past the beam. Rhys said he did not know. Bevan had gone past it, once for perhaps 11 minutes, and had come back and had not spoken for the rest of the shift, and had drawn something on the back of the plan which Rhys had never been shown. Bevan had died the following spring of a burst appendix, 39 years old. The plan had come into Rhys's keeping. The penciled shading and the 4 Welsh words were in Bevan's own hand, added, Rhys believed, on the last day of his life. Rhys did not ask Prothero to go down. He asked him only to keep the plan, and to decide for himself. If you burn it, he said, I will not blame you. If you take it to Cardiff, they will burn it for you. If you go down, and here he did not finish the sentence. Prothero folded the linen into his waistcoat pocket. He walked back to his rooms above the chandlers in the sleet. He did not sleep. 9 months later, on the 3rd of November, he went down. Rhys was already dead by then. He had gone in the first week of December, having told nothing further to anyone but his priest. Prothero's logbook for those 9 months records nothing of the plan. It records only measurements, tonnages, the ordinary arithmetic of a working pit. And then, on the 3rd of November, at 11:38 in the evening, 3 lines. Cage, lamplit. Down. The night shift cage at the pit was rated for 12 men and a pony. On the night of the 3rd of November, it carried 1 surveyor, 1 lamp, and the night deputy, a man named Idris Watkins, who took Prothero to the lowest working level, and then went back up, because Prothero had asked him to. Watkins, questioned by the constable the following morning, said Prothero had told him only that he was checking a section for the inspectorate. Watkins had not questioned it. Surveyors went where they went. The cage descended at 3 feet per second. The shaft was 728 yards deep. It took the cage 7 minutes and 12 seconds to reach the bottom. Prothero timed it, as he always did, and wrote the figure down. The east, deep at the base of the pit, ran for 1,080 yards eastward under the mountain, at a gradient of 1 in 32, following the anthracite seam. It was, on the night of the 3rd of November, unworked. The last coal from that face had come out in 1919, and the level had been maintained since only for ventilation and for the pumps. It was lit along its main length by fixed carbide lamps at every 50th beam. Prothero walked it alone. His footsteps, the logbook records, made a doubled sound after the first 200 yards. The tread, and its own echo, offset by perhaps half a second. He noted the echo. He did not remark upon it further. At the 940th yard, the level bent southward through 11 degrees and began to descend more sharply. This was not on the current plans. It was on the linen plan of 1889. Prothero unfolded the linen against his knee, took a bearing with the Hoskins dial, and confirmed. He was standing at the mouth of the spur that Bevan had drawn and shaded over. The fixed carbide lamps ended here. Beyond this point, the drift was unlit. He lit his cap lamp. He wrote, in ink, at 4 minutes past midnight, at mouth of Bevan's spur. Air moving out, not in. Note this. He then walked into it. The Bevan spur was propped with pit props numbered in whitewash. In a hand Prothero did not recognize, from 1 upward. He counted them as he passed. Beam 1 was sound. Beam 2 was sound. Beam 3 had a saucer of standing water at its base, unnaturally circular, that his lamp flame ruffled but did not evaporate. Beam 4 was sound. At beam 5 the drift narrowed to 4 feet 6 inches by his folding rule. He had to remove his cap to pass under it. At beam 6 he noted a smell he described in the logbook as ferrous, but sweet, not the ordinary damp. At beam 7 he stopped and listened for 2 minutes. He wrote, "No sound. My own breath, very loud." At beam 8 the whitewash number was smeared as if by a hand drawn across it, while wet, though the whitewash was decades old. At beams 9, 10, 11, the drift ran straight and level, contrary to the linen plan which had marked a downward gradient. At beam 12, the gradient resumed sharply. Present tense. He is at the 13th beam. His carbide lamp is burning at its ordinary steady yellow. He holds the brass dial compass in his left hand, watches the needle. The needle is turning slowly, clockwise, without provocation, at approximately 1 degree every 8 seconds. He notes it. He does not stop. Beam 14. The needle is now turning at 1 degree every 4 seconds. Beam 15. The needle spins twice, freely, and then stops, pointing not to north, but to the drift's forward direction. Prothero taps it. It does not move. He writes, at 41 minutes past midnight, dial has chosen a north of its own. I will trust the drift instead. Beam 16. He hears, for the first time, a sound that is not his own, a low, even pressure in the ears, as of a distant fan. But the ventilation ducts do not reach this drift. Beam 17. The sound resolves into what he describes, in ink, as breathing, or the imitation of it, at an interval of 11 seconds per cycle. Beam 18. The smell strengthens. Beam 19. His lamp flame, for the first time, leans forward, not upward, by perhaps 15 degrees. He stops. He watches the flame for a full minute by the second hand of his watch. The flame does not right itself. At the 20th beam, the drift widened. Prothero measured it with a Chesterman tape at his feet. 11 feet, 6 inches across, 7 feet 4 inches high. The whitewashed numbers ended. The props from beam 20 onward were of a different timber, darker, harder, cut square rather than rounded, and set without wedges, as if grown into the coal. He noted this. He wrote, at 14 minutes past 1, "These are not colliery props. I do not know what these are. Turning back is still possible." He then wrote, on the next line, in the same steady ink, "I do not intend to turn back." And then, in a hand very slightly less steady, "Forgive me, Sarah." Sarah being the name of his late wife, dead 15 years. Beam 21. The lamp flame bends forward by 30 degrees and hisses. Beam 22. The pressure in his ears drops sharply enough that he swallows to clear them. He writes, as if a door opened somewhere ahead of me. Beam 23. He stops and turns and looks back. He can see, at the very limit of his lamp's throw, the drift as he came, but the whitewashed beams appear closer together than he remembers them. He writes, a trick of the light. It must be beam 24. The walls, he notes for the first time, are no longer coal, they are stone. Not the country rock, not the sandstone or the shale of the measures, but a dressed, close-grained grey stone, cut in courses. He runs his hand along it. It is cold, drier than the coal, and warmer to the palm than to the back of the hand. A distinction he records and underlines. Beam 25. The courses run true. Beam 26. A joint, mortarless, tight enough that he cannot slip his knife blade into it. Beam 27. The drift ends. The 27th beam is the last beam. Beyond it there is no drift. There is a chamber, or the mouth of a chamber, or something that occupies the place a chamber would occupy. Prothero stands at the 27th beam for, the logbook records, 9 minutes without writing. Then he writes one line. There is a door. It is not our door. And then he crosses out the word door and writes above it aperture, and then crosses that out and writes above it threshold, and then leaves all 3 words standing, one atop the other, in the ink that does not forget. It is now 3 minutes past 2 in the morning of the 4th of November, 1927. I am not going to tell you yet what he wrote at 4 minutes past 2. I am not going to tell you what he wrote at 41 minutes past 2, or at 17 minutes past 3, which is the last written entry in the black logbook, before the page that is not writing. I am going to tell you, first, what a small letter in the papers of a professor of archaeology at Aberystwyth, dated 1952, said about the drift Bevan had drawn in 1889, and then I will come back to the 27th beam. In the private papers of a Professor L., of the Department of Archaeology at Aberystwyth, deposited in a Welsh county archive in 1971, on the condition that they not be catalogued for 20 years. There is a letter dated the 14th of March 1952, addressed to a colleague at the National Museum in Cardiff. The letter is 2 pages long, handwritten in blue ink. In its second paragraph, the professor writes, "I have now compared Bevan's 1889 sketch with the material from the F. Festiniog and Quo Midwile reports, and with the 2 Breton parallels Dr. C. sent last autumn. And I am forced to the tentative conclusion that whatever Bevan drew, it does not belong to any period of Welsh construction I can recognize. It does not belong to the Roman occupation. It does not, forgive me, belong to any period we currently admit." The letter continues, "There has been talk, in certain quiet quarters, since the war, of workings under these mountains that predate the coal. That predate, indeed, any settlement we can date. Bevan's sketch, if it is honest, is not a colliery drawing. It is an archaeological drawing, and the figure he has copied from the face of what he calls the beam. I will not speculate. I will say only that I have seen its like once before, on a slate fragment from a private collection at Machynlleth, and that the owner would not tell me where the slate had come from, and that the owner died the following winter." The professor does not press further. He asks his colleague, cautiously, whether the museum has any unaccessioned material from the coal districts that might repay a second look. There is no reply on file. The National Museum's correspondence log for the spring of 1952 shows a letter received from the professor and marked "No action." The professor did not write again on the subject. He retired in 1958. He died in 1966. His papers sat in a box in a solicitor's office in Aberystwyth until 1971, and were sealed until 1991. And even now, the file that would contain Bevan's original sketch is marked "Missing on transfer." So the professor thought Bevan had drawn something Wales does not admit, and Rhys, on his deathbed in Treala, thought Bevan had drawn something that had killed him. And Prothero, at the 27th beam, at 2:03 on the 4th of November, had written the word "threshold" and left it standing. What did he write at? 2:04. What did he write at 3:17? What is on the page that is not writing? I am going to tell you now. The following is transcribed, verbatim where legible, from the black oilcloth-bound logbook of Emery's Prothero, colliery surveyor, held in a private collection in Cardiff, and inspected by this channel under condition of non-reproduction. "Beyond the 27th beam," Prothero wrote, "the drift ends in a wall of dressed stone. The wall is grey, close-grained, cut in courses, 6 inches high by lengths from 11 to 22 inches. The courses are laid without mortar. I have set the tip of my knife against 6 separate joints, and cannot enter any of them by the thickness of a hair. In the centre of the wall there is a doorway. It is 7 feet 2 inches in height by 3 feet 4 inches in breadth. It is not framed. The stone of the wall runs uninterrupted around it. The doorway is closed by a single slab of the same stone, set flush. At the height of a man's waist, on the right of the slab, there is an iron ring, drawn out of the stone as if the stone had been poured around it. The ring is cold. My hand upon it is warm. Upon the slab there is a carving. I will describe it as accurately as I can, being no draftsman of figures. In the centre of the slab, standing upright, is a figure of a person, or of something in the shape of a person. It is taller than a man, in the proportion of the slab, by perhaps a third. Its head is elongated, running upward from the brow to a point above the crown, and is larger in proportion to the body than a man's head is. Its eyes are shown as two ovals, wider than a man's eyes, and set further apart. Its arms are long and held at its sides. Its hands are shown open. I count on each hand 5 fingers, but the fingers are longer than a man's fingers, and the last joint of each is bent inward. Around the figure, filling the whole of the slab, there is a pattern of interlaced lines, of the manner one sees on old crosses in the churchyards, but not of any pattern I have seen in any churchyard. I set my cap lamp on the floor, 3 feet from the slab, to draw. As I began to draw, the flame of the lamp bent horizontally toward the slab, and remained bent. It did not gutter. It did not smoke. It burned steadily, sideways, as if the air behind the slab were drawing it. I moved the lamp. The flame followed the slab. I moved it again. The flame followed the slab. I have been a collieryman 31 years, and I have never seen a flame do this. There is air moving through that stone. There is a place behind it where air is moving. I have put my hand upon the ring for the second time. It is colder than before. I have put my ear against the slab. I can hear, or I believe I can hear, at the interval of 11 seconds, a sound that is not my breathing, and is not the pit. It is the sound I first heard at the 16th beam. It is closer now. It is on the other side of the stone. I have decided not to pull the ring. I have decided this because I am a surveyor and not a fool, and because Ianto said Bevan came back and did not speak, and because I am the only man alive who knows this drift is here. And if I do not come back, no man alive will know. I am going to draw the figure. Then I am going to walk out. The next page of the logbook is not writing. It is a drawing, in Indian ink, of the figure on the slab. The drawing occupies the full page. The proportions match, so far as they can be checked, the description above. The elongated head, the wide-set ovals of the eyes, the long fingers with the inward bent last joint. The knotworks around, though, and this is the detail that has caused every archivist who has seen the page to note it. The knotwork surround is not closed. It runs around the figure, weaves under and over itself in the manner of a Welsh cross. And then, at the lower left of the page, it opens outward and continues into a single line that runs off the edge of the paper. The line does not end. It leaves the page. That is what Prothero wrote. That is what Prothero drew. I am not going to tell you what it means. I am not qualified to tell you what it means. I am going to tell you what happened to the man who wrote it, and to the men who read it after him. And you will weigh the rest yourself. Prothero was found at 17 minutes past 4 on the morning of the 4th of November, sitting on a tram rail at the pit head, his left boot missing. The logbook clutched to his chest. He did not release the logbook to the constable. He did not release it to Gethin Llewellyn. He did not release it to the doctor who was called from Bargode. He did not speak for 9 days. On the 10th day, according to his daughter's later recollection, he said one sentence to her, and then said nothing further of it for the remaining 6 years of his life. The sentence, she said, was this: Cariad, I did not pull the ring. On the 19th of February, 1928, on the certificate of 2 doctors, one of them a locum, whose name does not appear on the medical register beyond that year, Emrys Prothero was committed to Bridgend County Asylum on the ground of fixed delusional belief. non-violent, with associated mutism and refusal of food. He took the logbook with him. It was, at his insistence, permitted to remain in his possession. He read from it silently for portions of most days. He did not show its contents to any doctor. He died at Bridgend on the 6th of August 1934 of pneumonia, aged 65. He came up white-haired, and he stayed white-haired. The logbook passed, by his written instruction, to his daughter. He was dismissed as broken. Nobody in authority went back down, and the truth, if it is truth, is still waiting under the mountain. Among the papers of Dr. Margaret Harvard, medical officer at Bridgend County Asylum from 1934 to 1941, deposited with the Wellcome collection after her death in 1978, there is an unposted letter dated the 9th of August 1934, 3 days after Prothero's death. It is addressed to a colleague at the University of Edinburgh. In it, Havard writes, in her characteristic green ink, the following: Patient P. died Monday. I have now read the logbook he carried. I confess I did not expect it to be what it is. It is not the writing of a psychotic man. It is the writing of a surveyor who has seen something he could not account for, and has recorded it, in the manner of his trade, with unusual honesty. I do not know what to do with it. If I show it to Cardiff, they will suppress it. If I show it to London, they will laugh at it. If I keep it, I will be complicit. I am keeping it. She kept it. She never posted the letter. Havard's private notes on Prothero, filed with the same collection, contain one further detail worth stating. She examined him twice on admission, in February 1928, and again in April. She recorded, on both occasions, a peculiarity in his hearing. He would flinch, without provocation, at intervals of approximately 11 seconds, when placed in a quiet room, and would not flinch at all when placed near the asylum's boiler, whose thrum a normal patient found intolerable. She wrote in the margin, in the green ink, "He is listening for something that is not in this room." In 1932, 5 years after Prothero's descent, a survey party under the direction of the colliery's new chief engineer descended the East Deep in order to reassess the ventilation of the lowest level. Their report, filed with the Mines Inspectorate at Cardiff in November of that year, is a routine document of some 14 pages. In an appendix, however, an appendix marked photographic plates. For reference, there is a single glass plate photograph, plate number 4, taken at what the report describes as the eastern extremity of the East Deep, at approximately 940 yards from the pit bottom. The photograph shows the mouth of a spur running southward and downward, propped with pit props, the first of which bears, in whitewash, the numeral 1. The report does not remark upon this. The photograph was withdrawn from the file in 1938 and marked transferred, provenance unclear. A print of it, however, was retained in the private album of the chief engineer and passed to his son, and thence to a mining history society in Merthyr, where it is on record. The 1932 plate carries one further detail that the report ignores. At the extreme right of the frame, half in shadow, there is a small object on the drift floor which the print's resolution renders only as a dark oblong. The Society's cataloguer, in 1979, annotated it with a single line: Compare boot, workman's, size 10, left foot, standard issue, Rhondda district, 1920s. The cataloguer did not press further. He was a retired underviewer himself, and had known the district a long time. On the 11th of March, 1938, 6 months before the outbreak of war, the National Coal Board's predecessor body issued a directive to the collieries' owners, a copy of which survives in the National Archives at Kew, in a bound file marked Ventilation, Various, requiring the permanent sealing and backfilling of any unrecorded workings east of the 940-yard mark in the East Deep level. The directive does not describe what workings. It does not attach a plan. It requires the sealing to be completed by the 1st of May, and the completion certified in writing to the inspectorate. The certification, signed by Gethin Llewellyn, is dated the 29th of April. The workings east of that mark were, from that date, backfilled with rubble and concrete. The pit itself closed in 1961. It was capped in 1963. It does not appear on the Ordnance Survey sheets after that date. There is a fourth item in the corroboration cascade, less well known than the others, which turned up in a Cardiff auction catalogue in 1994. Lot 212. A field notebook belonging to a Home Office observer named Idris Price, who accompanied the 1938 sealing party under some authority not specified in the notebook itself. Price's entries are terse. On the 22nd of April he writes, "Reached terminus. Wall present, as described. Ring present. No attempt to open. Concrete poured at 41-foot mark to depth of 11 feet. Second pour to depth of 9 feet at 52-foot mark. Third pour at drift mouth." And then, on the 23rd, one further line, written after the party had come up. "The stone was not ours. Whoever laid it before we were a people. God forgive us for closing it in." The notebook was withdrawn from sale by the vendor before the hammer fell. Its present location is not known. One private letter kept and unposted. One photograph withdrawn from an official file and preserved by accident. One sealing order unexplained. One field notebook withdrawn from public sale. None of these 4 items proves anything about the 27th beam, or the slab, or the figure with the elongated head. Any one of them could be explained away. Taken together, they suggest, at the minimum, that Prothero was not the only man who knew that a drift ran southeast from the 940-yard mark, and was not to be opened. He wrote in ink because pencil forgets. The institutions of his day preferred pencil. What remains? The logbook, the letter, the photograph, the sealing order, the field notebook, is what remains because one man wrote it down, and because 3 or 4 others could not quite bring themselves to burn the paper. Prothero was a colliery surveyor of 31 years' standing, a widower, a Methodist, a man who wrote his figures in ink because pencil forgets. On the night of the 3rd of November, 1927, he went down a shaft that no longer exists, into a drift that has been backfilled since 1938. Past 27 pit props that nobody living has counted since, to a wall of dressed stone that we cannot now inspect, and he wrote down in his small, deliberate hand exactly what he saw. He asked nothing of us afterward. He did not seek to be believed. He gave the logbook to his daughter, and his daughter gave it, in 1971, to a private collector in Cardiff, on the condition that its contents not be reproduced except by transcription. We have not, as a country, ever gone back down. We did not listen to Rees on the lower street of Treallo. We did not listen to Havard, whose letter was never posted. We did not listen to the photographer at 940 yards in 1932. We did not listen to Price, whose notebook was withdrawn before the hammer fell. We did not listen to the man who signed the sealing order in 1938, or to whoever told him to sign it. We committed the surveyor. We buried the drift. We lost the plate. And we are, all of us, still standing above the mountain. He was dismissed as broken. Nobody in authority went back down. And the truth, if it is truth, is still waiting under the mountain. If one person watching this knew Prothero's name before tonight, I would be surprised. If one person watching this shares it now, sends this to one other person, one, who might read the name and remember it, then Emery's Prothero has been listened to by one more soul than he was listened to in 1928. That is the whole of the ask. None of this is conclusive. All of it is suggestive. I am the forensic archivist. The archive is buried. We keep digging. Good night.